And so let's go ahead and get started. Tonight, I'd like to introduce our presentation, Emotional Management in Troubling Times, Using Cognitive Therapy Strategies and Feel Better. Marc Charbonnet is a cognitive behavioral therapist who has been in practice for over 30 years. He serves NISD as a behavior interventionist at the elementary and middle school levels. His message, emotional management, is a powerful tool for adults and students alike, and we are thrilled that he is with us to share this important message with our community this evening. So without further ado, Mr. Marc Charbonnet.
Muted. All right, can you hear me okay? Awesome, thank you for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here as I'm kind of seeing folks scroll through that are logging on. I love to see that there are students that are attending this, so that's terrific. So welcome to the students and families of. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all a little bit today about emotional management and how maybe cognitive therapy can help troubling times seem a little bit more manageable. So again, I appreciate being invited to be here. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. In addition to being a cognitive behavioral therapist for over 30 years now, which seems like forever, but not that long all at the same time. I'm also a behavior interventionist, and that's what my role is here at Northwest ISD. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, but kind of suffice to say that I'm a behavior coach for teachers. I help teachers help students manage their behavior in the classroom and in the kind of the educational setting. So I've been here, this is my 4th year here in Northwest ISD, and I've really enjoyed my time here. I've met a lot of great people, and this is my first year at Medlin, and the staff there is terrific. So again, I'm looking forward to sharing some good information with you. If possible, if you can, kind of while I'm chatting, we won't need it for a few minutes, you can grab a pen and a piece of paper. I'm going to ask you to write a sentence or two here in a few minutes, but you have some time to do that. So if you don't mind, that would be helpful here shortly. As far as it goes, we're going to talk about cognitive therapy. What is it? How does it work? I'm going to talk briefly about mindfulness, and that will take up all of our time. At the very end of this presentation, there's some resources on it. So if you want to do a little investigation about cognitive behavioral therapy, about these topics that I'm talking about, there are some good resources at the end of the presentation. This is also being recorded, and I think it's available in some manner or another. I'm sure Ms. McCauley can answer questions on how to access the recorded presentation. All right, so off we go. Let me tell you a little bit about cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm going to kind of be a bit of a shill for it for a second, because being a therapist and this using this as my therapy orientation, of course, I'm partial to it. But let me tell you a little bit about it. Cognitive behavioral therapy is often referred to as the gold standard of psychotherapy. And it's referred to as the gold standard of psychotherapy because it's the most researched form of psychotherapy in the history of all therapy. So form of psychotherapy has been shown to be more effective by research, and this research has gone on for many, many years, probably up to 70 or 80 years. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown to be more effective in treating depression and anxiety than medication, which most people don't know, that this type of intervention is actually better than medication management, just in terms of dealing with depression, anxiety, and anger as well. And so actually the second half of this presentation has to do specifically with depression, anxiety, and anger, although we're going to touch on all of those as we're kind of going through this process. So in reality, in my opinion, cognitive behavioral therapy, the philosophies and interventions are the most helpful and impactful information available regarding mental health that virtually nobody knows about. So I'm really happy that that folks keep kind of coming in, which is terrific, because I really feel like this is information, especially over the course of the last year when things have been so trying for many of us. So this will be helpful, and I welcome any kinds of questions that you might have. If you have a question or two, that's great. Just go ahead and type them in the chat. We will either answer them on the fly, or if we don't do that, I'll take care of those at the end of the presentation. Let me tell you a little bit about cognitive behavioral therapy in specific. One side, obviously there's two sides to it. There's the cognitive side and the behavioral side. We're not going to talk a lot about the behavioral end of it today, but just so you'll know, behavior therapy kind of focuses on observable behaviors that can be seen and measured, that can be counted, and they pass what's called the dead man's test, which means if a dead man can do it, it's not a behavior. And so it really focuses on those observable, measurable behaviors. And it also looks at behavior through the lens of what we refer to as behavior functions. And behavior functions basically are, think of it this way, all behavior is communication. All behavior has a communicative intent. And that intent is referred to as the behavior's function. And there are 4 functions of behaviors. If we were in person, I might ask if anybody knew what those were. But there are 4 functions of behavior. There's a sensory function, there's an attention function, escape, and also a function to gain access to something tangible. That's the kind of intervention that the behavior interventionists that work in Northwest ISD primarily use. It's about environmental manipulation. You might have heard some terms like reinforcement, punishment, data collection, data analysis. That's all kind of behavioral terms. Goes with the behavioral side of cognitive behavioral therapy. Now that I've said all that, we're not going to talk about that at all, but we are going to talk about cognitive therapy. So let me tell you about kind of the foundational underpinning, the foundational kind of tenet of cognitive therapy. And here it is. About 2,000 years ago, there was a philosopher named Epictetus. And Epictetus said men, and I put in there and women, are disturbed not by things, but by the view with which they take of them. So really what that means in kind of fancy language, in regular language, that means that it doesn't really, largely, it doesn't depend on what happens to us or around us. It only matters what we think about what happens to us or around us. And those are 2 really different kinds of beliefs. And in terms of the buy-in for cognitive therapy, that's an important belief to kind of hold dear, is that situations can happen and it's not an event that makes me think or feel a certain thing, but it is what my beliefs about that thing are that then cause me to feel and think a particular way and subsequently acting a particular way. So we don't have the opportunity for a lot of discussion about that, but I do want to give you a couple of examples. So let's think of it. Let's say that there are 3 different examples of an individual going to a party. There's 3 different thoughts. So let's say that thought number 1, the person who has a party coming up says, the party sounds like a lot of fun. I love going out and meeting new people. Likely those thoughts about the party are going to kind of engender happy, excited kinds of feelings. Sounds like a lot of fun, so they're anticipating fun. I love going out and meeting new people. That's somebody who seems excited about doing that. So that's kind of what their beliefs are about the party. Another person, same party, might say something like, parties aren't really my thing. I'd much rather stay home, hang out, Netflix and chill. That person, not really negative, it's not really positive. They say the parties aren't really their thing, but it's not like they love them or hate them. It's just kind of not my thing. So really kind of the emotions that have to do with those thoughts are neutral. And the third example kind of gives you the other end of it, which is, and by the way, if I was going to a party, especially with folks I didn't know, this might be me, I'm a bit introverted. I would say, let's say my thought process was, I never know what to say or do at parties. I might make a fool of myself if I go. So now, because of those thoughts about the same party that all 3 of these folks were going to, those thoughts might engender emotions that have to do with anxiety, maybe sadness, certainly dread as a party is coming up. So really what this illustrates is we have a party. It's the same party that all 3 of these folks are going to. The party in and of itself doesn't make anybody think what they think. It's just our beliefs about the party that then cause us to think and feel the way that we feel in relation to that particular event. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat, but I'll just kind of keep rocking along. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail now about cognitive therapy, about what the heck is it. Cognition is just a fancier word of saying thought. So cognitive therapy focuses on how our thoughts affect our emotions and behaviors in very compelling ways. And there are three basic ideas behind cognitive therapy. The first is our thoughts create all of our moods. I'm going to say that again. Our thoughts create all of our moods. So again, we have a situation where an event happens, and sometimes people kind of get in the habit of saying, for example, argument with somebody, and they say something like, "You make me so mad." Actually, cognitive therapy says, you don't make me anything. My beliefs about you make me mad at this time, but you aren't doing anything other than just being you. But the way I think about what's happening with you may make me mad. So our thoughts create all of our moods. And furthermore, persistent negative thoughts create negative emotional states such as depression, anxiety, and anger. So sometimes these negative thoughts that we might have that cause negative emotions, they kind of come and go. That's wildly normal. However, when they come and stay, we end up kind of having these other issues. And so these thoughts that don't come and go, that come and stay, then what happens is we tend to practice them. And we say them over and over in our heads. And so then we now have an associated kind of a longer term mood issue that has to do with this negative thought system that we have created. So this negative thoughts that cause the associated harmful emotions on bullet there, number 2, are not realistic thoughts. They're distorted thoughts. And I'm going to go into a lot of detail about that here in just a few minutes. But the distorted thoughts just means that they're not actually reality based. And I'll show you lots of examples about what I mean. It doesn't mean you're crazy or anything. It's nothing like that. It just means, as we'll get into them here in just a few minutes, it just means that they're really not fully based in reality. And then third, we can be trained and train ourselves to change the way that we think. And if you believe that thoughts, as we're talking about here, then cause all of the emotional states that we have, if we can change how we think, then as a byproduct of that, we're going to change how we feel. If we change how we feel, we're going to subsequently then maybe even change how we act. So it kind of goes in order of thinking, feeling, acting, instead of just something happens and then we are responding. Let's look at some examples, more evidence and clarification. Like I said, there's tons of evidence that supports all of the things that I'm talking about today. So this is science kind of in action with regard to how to think and feel better. So distorted thoughts. So, you might be asking, okay, well, let's say that I'm not feeling great. Let's say I have been depressed. I'm not sure about y'all, but this last year, as I know really for many of you, has been quite trying for me. Had a lot of different things going on. Had heart surgery back in May, and then had COVID in November, and then over Christmas break, another thing happened, and it was just lots of stuff going on. And I feel really grateful that I know a lot of this. I've had 30 years to practice cognitive therapy in my head, and it was very helpful during these really trying times. So one might be asking, though, if you have these kind of negative emotional states, and now let's say we even believe that negative emotional states are caused by these negative thoughts, we can use our emotions as a guide. And so really, basically, we're just kind of saying, how am I feeling? And then in essence, we're asking ourselves, how am I thinking? Because if we're feeling good, we're thinking good. And if we're not feeling well, if we're feeling depressed, then that means that our emotions, our thought processes have turned negative. And we practice those thoughts over and over again so much that they become what we refer to as automatic negative thoughts. When I do this presentation for younger kids, and it actually kind of sticks in my head too, we use the acronym ANT for automatic negative thought. It's a way for folks to remember that you might have ants in your brain. So we want to get rid of those. But the automatic negative thoughts are the things that cause this negative emotional state over time. So use your emotions as a guide. If you're feeling these negative kinds of things, it means that we are thinking somewhere in this negative sphere. And we need to then kind of go in and find what kind of thought errors that we're practicing, change them, and then we'll practice some new ones, and as a result, we'll feel better. So use your emotions as a guide. All right, emotional management is really the goal here. Our distorted and unrealistic thoughts has specific names. I'm going to go over a list of them just here in a minute. What's really kind of cool about cognitive therapy, as you'll see, is that it's really, really practical. So a lot of things that we're going to be talking about, you'll be like, oh, I've heard of that before. And I can see how that has to do with what we're talking about in terms of emotional management. So really our goal in this process, identification and substance intervention process, is this emotional management. It doesn't necessarily mean we're always going to be happy in every circumstance. Sometimes things are rough. Sometimes things are trying. And believing we're always going to be happy is as unrealistic as thinking that we're always going to be miserable. Again, we want to be able to manage our emotions, especially in really difficult times, like, again, like we've had over this last year. It's almost like we can look back over the last year and just kind of making it through is a bit of a victory. And I believe that because resiliency is really an important quality as well. So let's talk a little bit more about these specific thought issues that actually have names. And I referred to them earlier as automatic negative thoughts or ants. They're also referred to as cognitive distortions, distorted thoughts, kind of a different, several different ways of saying it. So I might use those terms interchangeably. So as I'm going through this, if like right now, as we're talking, there's probably somebody here along with us, the 60 folks that are on here right now, probably somebody or more isn't feeling that great. Try to find your thinking on this list. And for those who are feeling okay today, which is great, try to find your past self on this list in times that you've been really depressed or you've been really anxious about something, angry about something. See if you can't find how that emotional state was caused by these thinking, these cognitive distortions. I hope that y'all can see that okay. But this checklist of cognitive distortions is about 10 of them, 10 or 11 of them. And the first one is all or nothing thinking. And all or nothing thinking, oftentimes referred to as black and white thinking, means that you look at things in an absolute black and white category. And the problem with that is that, it doesn't sound, kind of on the surface like it's that big of a deal. However, if the world that we live in or that I might live in is binary, it's either all of this or all of that, it kind of excludes the reality that we really are all living in, which is we really live in the gray. There are some things that are polars, but compared to the things that are in the gray area, the polar binary kinds of choices of black or white are very few. So living in that kind of situation is distorted because that's not where we're living most of the life that we live. So, all right, number 2, overgeneralization. You view a negative event as a never-ending pattern of defeat. And so that would be a situation where something happens today, early in the day or whatever. And then what we do is we take that situation and we then just kind of view it as, well, there it goes again, just another thing where, life just kicks me when I'm down. And so we're starting now to see how these thoughts can start to, even if a lot of times if folks have 1 or 2 of these, that's not that bad of a situation. Folks who are depressed or have, pretty significant negative emotional states might have 4 or 6 of these things. So again, overgeneralization is just you take one event and now kind of make life all about that thing or your day all about that thing. Mental filter is dwell only on the negatives. So that's a situation where your day has many ups and downs, positive, negatives, lots of neutrals in most of our day. But we characterize our day by only attending to the negatives. Yeah, the positives happen. But boy, let me tell you, somebody else, or I might just tell myself, negative happened as well. Number 4, discounting the positive. That's the other side. That's something positive happens. And we say, yeah, that happened. And then we just kind of slide back over to. So the positives in that sense, as opposed to being equitable and trying to say, well, if we're going to talk about the negatives that happen, which might be realistic, we also need to be realistic and talk about the positives. So we can't discount what happened during those positive times. Otherwise, we're not really being equitable to ourselves. Number 5, and this is a big one too. This is one of the more common ones that I think I've certainly had in my past, but lots of folks too have had this as well. Jumping to conclusions, there's two different kinds of jumping to conclusions. The first is mind reading. And that sounds silly, but it's kind of the assumption that you believe you know what somebody else is thinking. And a lot of times, and so what we're thinking, of course, is if you're in a negative emotional state, we're convinced that what they're thinking is negative. And we don't have any evidence to support that. And so when I was in graduate school, and I referenced this a couple of times because when I learned all of this kind of stuff in graduate school, I couldn't believe that you could choose how you thought. I thought that sounded unbelievable. And it literally changed my life. So I'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that it did to help me. But the mind reading, I remember the professor saying, well, you know, you've got this mental picture of a pitcher on the pitcher's mound at the bottom of the 9th inning, and it's the World Series and 2 outs and yada, yada. You got to know what's on his mind. Well, you don't. We can think that we do, but unless we ask, we don't know. We can assume, but again, we don't know because there's not evidence to support that. So, and mind reading, think about it like this. If you have a significant other or parent-child relationships, if you believe you know what somebody else is going to think or say to you, if you talk to them about a specific thing and you think that it's going to be negative, it's a communication killer. Why should I even bother talking to you when I know what you're going to say? The reality is, I don't know what you're going to say. It's just this belief that I have that's causing then that communication being kind of stifled and not even beginning underway. The second one for jumping to conclusions is similar, and it's fortune telling. And this is the distorted belief that we know what's going to happen in the future. And shockingly, this is a negative interpretation of the future. So folks with anxiety do a lot of this kind of thing. They look into the future. And one of the things that you can use as a bit of a guide in terms of are you fortune telling a lot is how often do you start sentences with what if? And so if we're constantly living in a what if world, we're thinking about what if this happens and what if this happens. And that's not really a bad thing as long as you're kind of problem solving about things for the future. But if what we're what ifing all the time is what if this happens and then that happens and then that happens and then oh my gosh, that happens and oh my gosh, then what am I going to do? We can what if ourselves into this anxiety ridden mess. And just because we are living in the future, a future of which we irrationally painted unilaterally negative or all negatively. So number 6, magnification and minimization. You blow things way out of proportion or you shrink their importance. Typically, we blow little things way out of proportion and we take big things and we minimize those. In these kind of situations, what's usually happening is that we take little negatives and make them into big ones, and we take big positives and make it into little ones. So that's kind of how this magnification and minimization thing works. Folks who feel really good about themselves take little negatives and keep them little, and they take positives and they magnify those. That's good. The flip side of that can start to lead more to, again, just constantly feeling now that negativity is surrounding me, and this is just one more set of evidence in my irrational mind that situation is really difficult. Number 7 is emotional reasoning. And this is you reason from how you feel. And so this one says and reads kind of like, I feel like an idiot, so I really must be one. I'm feeling really nervous, it must be dangerous. So remember, and why this is an irrational thought, is that the emotional situations don't lead to our thinking. Our thinking leads to our emotional situation. So really the folks that are doing emotional reasoning have this backwards. They're starting from the feeling that they have and then generalizing to what the thought must be. Instead of thinking, if I'm feeling this way, I must be thinking poorly. Now I can problem solve and I know what to do, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Emotional reasoners always kind of stay in that emotional situation, and then because they're angry, for example, then it must mean I'm being slighted in some way, or it must be something is threatening around me. When again, they actually have it backwards. Number 8, this is a really, really powerful one that rings really true to me. So again, kind of back in my learning about this graduate school days, should statements. So should statements, so you criticize yourself or with should, ought, must, have to. And it's not really just being critical of it. It's using those words so routinely that they become like a demand expectation. So words like should or have to are different than wish or want. Wish or want is a lesser form of a should statement. The problem with should statements is if you think the world should be a certain way in the face of mounting evidence that it is not that way, then what we're doing is we're setting a demand that's, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, a demand statement is an 8. If you set a world demand that things should be this or should be that, and they're not, our associated negative reaction to that 8 is an 8 emotionally. That's not good. 2 away from 10. The thing that helps in these situations is if you reframe. One of the things that the research for cognitive therapy tells us is word choices matter, and they are critical. So if we replace should with wish or want, that's a 4 or a 5 at most, maybe a 3 or a 4. And also if a wish or a want gets violated, it doesn't happen, our emotional reaction is the same. So we need to make sure that we're taking these shoulds out of our kind of mental vocabulary, because they set up the world to be really demanding that the world should be the way that I envision it. All right, labeling. Instead of just saying I made a mistake, you tell yourself I'm a jerk or I'm dumb or I'm a loser. And labeling just, and why that's a bad idea is if you're saying I'm dumb, I can't be smart and dumb at the same time. So it really kind of excludes other possibilities. So if you're labeling yourself or somebody else, it really doesn't, it's distorted because people are way more complex than to label yourself or somebody else just one particular thing. And the last one's personalization and blame. So you blame yourself that for things that weren't entirely your fault. And certainly in situations, the flip side of that would be things that were great, that you had a lot to do with. Folks that struggle emotionally in these kind of situations then will discount that and say that it's really not really as meaningful. All right, so that's kind of a lot of information. And again, all this is going to be available to you on the recording of this presentation. So I'm going to kind of move along here relatively quickly. Time seems to fly by really fast. But if you've got a paper and pen, I want you to do this right fast. This will take about 2 minutes. Write down one of the following distorted thoughts, just one or the other. All I want you to do is just write it on paper, because I'm going to flip the slide in just a second. I had a chance to kind of jot this down. I'm going to flip the slide to those distorted thoughts. And what I want you to do, just as a bit of a practice opportunity, is to take that sentence there in front of you. Either I feel miserable, so things must be horrible and they'll always be horrible. Or number 2, I'm worthless and totally unlovable, and so I'll be alone forever. Take one of those two, and then I'm going to flip to that list of cognitive distortions we just reviewed. And I want you to see if you can find what kinds of distorted thoughts in whichever sentence that you chose to write down. So I think that's been enough time to jot that down. So I'm going to move along. And I'll give you about a minute to kind of look at this. Might be more than one in whichever sentence that you chose. And if you could be so bold, if anybody is feeling adventurous, if you would type your thoughts into, you can just put like number 1, and then you can type your whatever distorted thought you think it is in the chat. Because I'd like to see if folks are kind of thinking in terms of being able to determine which one of these cognitive distortions that it may be. So again, I'll give you about 30 seconds to kind of look at that. And if you can, type it in the chat. If we don't have time to do that, that's cool too, because I've got quite a bit more to chat about. Oh, awesome. Man, look at y'all. All right, great. I'm not going to review all of those. I'm just going to kind of give you my thoughts. But I really appreciate you typing that in there. Thank you for participating. All right, so how'd we do? We'll kind of go through those here in just a second. But really, I want you to now think about, okay, so let's say that we have a thought that we've identified. Well, let me back up. Let's say that we recognize we're feeling bad. We're feeling sad, depressed, whatever it might be, anxious. We then go in and we write down our own thought. And so it might not be one of the two that I wrote there, but let's just say you write down whatever it might be. It might be one of those two. So you write that thought down. Then you go to the cognitive distortions list. You find it on there, just like we did. Remember to use your emotions as a guide. But after you've identified the cognitive distortions in that negative thought that you're having, the next step is challenge that thought. Remember, it's an irrational, distorted thought. Challenge it as if you were your own defense attorney inside your head, charged with protecting your mental health. So your internal defense attorney starts to come out and say, okay, or your internal scientist starts to come out and say, where is the evidence? Where is the support that what I am thinking is true? So we look for the evidence that the distorted thought is true or false. So let's look at the two examples from earlier. Number one, I feel miserable, so things must be horrible, and they'll always be horrible. Emotional reasoning, fortune telling, so I feel miserable. So we're starting from feeling, so things must be, that's emotional reasoning. And they will always be horrible is me looking into the future, and that's fortune telling. Number two, I'm worthless and totally unlovable, so I'll be alone forever. Worthless is labeling, unlovable is labeling. Totally is black and white, could be that as well. Fortune telling, so I'll be alone forever. So all kinds of different distorted thoughts that are in those. So using this following slide, I'm not going to go over all of these, but this is what your internal defense attorney might be saying to you regarding these particular thoughts. So let's say the first one up at the top says, how do I know this thought is even accurate? How can I test my assumptions or beliefs to find out if it is accurate? Is this thought helpful? Am I blaming myself unnecessarily? Am I overgeneralizing? And so as you can see, there's lots of questioning about, is this thought really even legitimate? And if it is, if it's a legitimate thought, then that's one thing. However, I think what we're going to find is that the thoughts are distorted. So once we're able to see that the thoughts are distorted, that they're on that list, well, then the next thing that we do is we actually write down, if we can train ourselves to do this, there's a little bit of homework involved in cognitive behavioral therapy, but we actually write down kind of in column form, this whole process that I've talked about. So I'm going to kind of skip through this and go to this. So let's just say that you start with this column of I feel, and then the associated thought, the type of distortion, and then the last thing that we'll do is write a rational response back to ourselves that will be helpful, that we can replace the distorted thought with a new rational thought, and then practice that one over and over again. It will become an automatic positive thought, which is different than the automatic negative thought that got this whole process rolling. So as an example, let's say somebody was feeling anxious. Something that's very topical is, let's say the associated thought is the virus, or what if the virus kills me? So the type of distortion would be fortune telling, because now we're living in the future, discounting the positive, and that may mean that there's a vaccine, and that if you do get it, then 90% of the people, or however many percentage, recover, and all the kinds of statistics and things that we should be saying to ourselves versus, oh my gosh, what if? So then we write a rational response to ourselves after we've kind of identified what this all is. And we can say things to ourselves like, I don't have the virus. The vast majority of the people who recover from the virus, I can't tell the future. I'm not going to live in the future. So all those kinds of rational self-talk then replaces that automatic negative self-talk. And then again, the more we practiced our way into feeling bad, so automatic negative thoughts are happening kind of behind the scenes. Again, we practiced them so much, we don't even need to really overtly think about them. It's just the way we think. However, good news is that we practiced our way into it. We can practice our way out of it and into something else that is healthier and makes us feel better. So again, we're practicing these thoughts over and over and over again. We're challenging, we're identifying, using our emotions as a guide, and again, practicing these thoughts. And as a consequence, research shows us that, and personal experience as well, shows us that we will feel better as a result. All right, so we don't have a lot of time to talk about as far as discussion goes. I know that we're kind of running short on time anyway, but I have one more thing that I'd like to talk to you about, and this is just real brief. Mindfulness gets quite a bit of press going on about mindfulness these days. So yoga and meditation and all kinds of different mindfulness things. Lots of different school districts even use mindfulness exercises in PE and really all kinds of different opportunities to use mindfulness practices. Research very much supports mindfulness as kind of a pathway to well-being. In fact, I was reading an article just yesterday about what folks who have high levels of well-being in their life. There was a study that looked at 51,000 different studies of well-being, and mindfulness and cognitive therapy were both on the list of things that increase people's level of overall well-being, which is really cool. So that was just yesterday I read that. I was excited. All right, so what is mindfulness? And again, this is going to be really quick. But mindfulness is a moment-to-moment awareness to a present experience with a stance of open curiosity and increasing ability to attend to beneficial thoughts. That just sounds calming to me. But that's from Dr. Susan Smalley, who's a neuroscientist, and really quite eloquent with her words as well. But really, let me talk a little bit about mindfulness and how it can help us. Lots of research, like I said, about how it helps do things like relieve stress, it treats heart disease, lowers blood pressure, all kinds of different things, reduces chronic pain, improves sleep. But the main thing for me as a cognitive therapist that mindfulness does is it keeps us here in the present. And if we are here in the present or not, is in a negative future, or we are not in a regretful past. So if we are here in the present, in this moment, then it automatically disqualifies us from being anywhere else, that those negative cognitive distorted thoughts then have an opportunity to kind of increase. Several years ago, I was watching PBS and a psychiatrist, Deepak Chopra, and many of you might have heard of him, kind of a mindfulness guru and meditation and all kinds of kind of cool new agey kinds of things. But he said something that stuck with me even to this day. He said, I'm talking about the mindfulness practice. He said, ask yourself, he said, if you find yourself being really anxious or living in the past as far as regret goes, or the future, this negative future in terms of dread and anxiety, as you think about the present and as you are kind of focusing on this moment, ask yourself this question: what is wrong with this moment? And this moment that I just asked that question has just passed. And he was making the point that in the moment, and again, another moment has just passed, there's nothing wrong with that moment. The moment is what the moment is. The problem is that when we as individuals start to gather our moments together and we put them into a negative future, that becomes a problem. When we gather our historical moments together and we have regret, for example, as part of our past, that then ends up being the problem, but it's not the moment. So we can continue to ask ourselves, what is wrong with this moment? And it allows us to stay in the moment. And as the moments pass, we can then see that it really isn't about the moment. It's about what we are doing in terms of how we are thinking and about how that then creates things that are outside of that particular moment. And I found that very helpful, especially again in these times of really, really high anxiety and fear that many of us have experienced during this time. It keeps us grounded and it keeps us focused and it keeps us present. And that way, then we're not distracted by all these other kinds of negative things that are going on, because again, that's either something that's possibly going to happen or something that negative has happened, neither of which we can do anything about, but we can stay present in the moment. All right. Oh, think about this: regret and fear being the enemies of mindfulness. So fear being that negative interpretation of the future, regret, a negative interpretation of the past. Both are enemies of staying present in the moment. All right. Just a couple of things. As a recap, our perception of events is more important than the events themselves. Events happen. It's really what we think about the events. That's what's most important. Our thoughts and belief systems control our emotions. If we want to change how we feel, we have to change how we think. Healthy thinking is realistic and not filled with cognitive distortions or automatic negative thoughts. Use your emotions as a guide to let you know if you're thinking clearly, thinking in a healthy manner. Use your emotions as a guide. Use that list of cognitive distortions to help you identify and change those negative thoughts. Practice those, and you will think better as a result and feel better as well. Here is the list of resources. 2 of the best books that you can get if you want to do some further reading on cognitive behavioral therapy. Dr. David Burns, a psychiatrist who studied under the father of cognitive therapy, Aaron Beck, wrote 2 fabulous books that go into infinitely more detail than I did today that will really help you manage your moods and feel. A couple of books there, and then some other things on there that might be helpful just in terms of whether it's mindfulness or just how to use cognitive therapy in your daily life. Thank you all for attending, and I appreciate your participation.
I'm getting a lot of positive comments, Mr. Charbonnet.
Great. Are there any questions that anybody had that I can answer before everybody jets?
Does not look like any questions, but a lot of positive comments.
Well, you're all very welcome. Thank you.
Thank
Maybe
you.
next year I might see you all in person. How that would be just unbelievable. I think a lot of folks were here. That's cool. I'm glad.
Yes. Yes. And a lot of comments while you were speaking.
Good.
Making points. So I think everyone enjoyed it.
Good. I hope so. All right. Well, thanks, y'all. I will see y'all Tuesday.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You bet.